Streaming 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, around the world. This is Indie Rocks Radio.
Yeah, streaming 24 hours a day, and for the next hour we're going to have the second half of my chat with Stano, legendary artist Stano. Last week on the first hour, Stano took us through five of his tracks: Room, Majestic of Majesty, Kissing Trees, Bleeding Horse, and Memory Distorts a Life. And just to kind of, for continuity's sake, I'm going to start next half of the show with Memory Distorts a Life, and then Stano will pick the rest of the music. So here we go. They Say I Live in the Past, guest Stano.
They say I live in the past.
Have a look.
With a brilliantly atmospheric and powerful track from, I guess, Stano from Memory Distorts a Life. And I like the way it goes, Memory Distorts a Life and then Life Distorts a Memory. Have you been approached for people to use your music as it stands in TV and film?
Yeah, I've done a few small soundtracks, and but would you believe it's starting to open up now more than ever? People are they use. There's a few gaming companies that are starting to use some of my music, which is great. And also the Threat single that I done in 1980, that's gone into a game as well. Like, it's really interesting what's happening at the moment. Because everything is digital now and bits and pieces. I have a sort of guy working with us at the moment now. Getting the whole thing together because we didn't really figure it out. But it's interesting because I'm with CD Baby in America, and they sort of give you the option when you're putting the stuff out that you can let your stuff go out free because it's going to be taken anyway. But you can, once you let it go free, then they'll give you the details of where it's gone. Like in last year, like I only found out about 2 months ago, 280,000 downloads, around the world. And 10,000 downloads in Japan, and similar in America. So I have a guy now working with me trying to just capitalize on that sort of, and getting it out to a wider audience. And as I said before, it's amazing with the re-release of the first album that they're referencing all the new bands and all the new people that are coming out now.
How do you feel about that? Because obviously, there's quite a few articles being written at the moment about the Irish music scene, and some of it focused on Dublin, but it's broader than that. And Fontaines D.C. or the Murder Capital or Girl Band. Do you hear what people are talking about when they reference you?
Sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't. I think it wouldn't be saying the musical style. I mean, like at the time when I released my first album, 93, there were little poems I was writing, and a lot of the references at the time would have been like Beckett and Joyce and stuff like that. And I remember clearly one of the poems was, one of the lines was, "I once seen an old man in the hall." And I remember it clearly in my head going up the South Circular Road in Dublin, and it was a real wintry, misty day, and I was looking out the window of a bus, and I seen this old man standing in a corner, rain dripping down. And and I love Beckett, and it reminded me of Beckett. So the reference points were there, even though they wouldn't have been an influence on me. I wasn't really aware of them at the time. I knew who they were, but I hadn't read them. So references would pop up. But I just think at the time, I could never understand how, I'm from Dublin, I have a Dublin accent, and people are singing in American accents. So in a way, my things were backing tracks, little poems. You can clearly hear my accent coming through. And I think that, say, with the new batch of bands now, people are singing in their own accent, a new generation, which I think is only right. But also all the baggage of years and years ago, where people were sort of, it was I know it's a music industry now, but years and years ago, it was just, for me, it was purely about the music. I had no interest in the marketing end of the A&R. And there was a lot of things where people were trying to push me to be, I'm saying it, but Bono said to me years and years ago, he said, "Look, Stano, you could be a world-class producer." But like I wasn't interested in that end of it. I was interested in working, with my own material. So in a way, sort of, I've always shied away from sort of, getting involved with other people in music unless I like them. But it's sort of, it's interesting the way we're listening to the music now, and it's really interesting because I haven't heard that track in a few years. But I remember when I was just thinking back, I'd write every day, literally, like sometimes it'd be half a page, 2 pages, and I don't really know what they are. They'd be gathering ideas. I'd hear something on television, I'd be sitting down on my own in the garden. I actually dug a pond last year and have all these goldfish in it, and sit there daydreaming, and I always have a little notebook with me. And things just randomly pop into my head, so I'd be gathering the stuff down. But what was really interesting, particularly with that track, I don't like I bring the pieces of work into the studio, and I'd open up a page randomly when I'm working on track, and I'd maybe start off with 1 or 2 lines, and I'd say the 1 or 2 lines or sing them in a certain way, and then I'd close my eyes and start singing, and stuff would pop out. And what would be really interesting would be that when I finished the track and edited it, I'd go through maybe a week or 2 later, and it would have been a poem that I would previously, maybe a week later, and realize, geez, there's a load of lines in there. So they're still lodged in my head. So when I'm in the studio, I'm sort of, I'm always looking for atmospheres and moods. And I always find lyrics to be a distraction for me, even though I love lyrics. Like Bob Dylan is my favorite lyricist of all time, and I sort of, that's why a lot of my stuff was instrumental music, particularly in the production end of it, where you'd be in the studio and, I used to get in trouble with the band I had at the time, because they used to say to me, look, you're writing these lyrics, you're working on these melodies and this, that, and the other. And I'd say to the engineer, could I hear the track without the lyrics in it, or could I play the track backwards? And, everything would be gone out the window, but I'd just be instantly drawn to the effect of the track on me immediately. So I destroy music and reverse things, slow things down, and a lot of the time I'd be working on, I'm working on tracks up sometimes 15 years. They're not finished, and then sometimes I go in and I'd write a track in a day with a guy and it's done instantly. And there's, it's rough around the edges. It's very, very raw, and I just let it go. So I'm instantly checking myself all the time that I'm not repeating myself. And
yeah. That's interesting as well, just in terms of how you'll experiment with what you've already produced, because I was chatting to someone the other day and they were talking about Frank Zappa, and I think it was the album We're Only In It For The Money, and Frank Zappa said the way he's recorded that album, he said I could cut that tape in lots of different places, put it back together, and it would still work as another album, as an album. So it's interesting how you hear the sounds or the space or the melodies and want to put them in different places. This next album, A Blind Sound, track called Fatal.
Would you believe this track was actually, it was about 10 years old before it was released. So the track is actually about 20 years old. So that would have been, the basic track would have been put together on, with samplers. And it was another one of these tracks where I'd go in and see, a lot of the times I'd bring a musician in the studio, and sometimes the track I think they'd work on really, really well, they fall asunder and it just doesn't work for them. But so I randomly open up, another track, and this particular track, Fatal, as well. I opened this track and the guitar player just was going crazy on it, and I thought, okay, that worked. And so, sometimes you when you set out to do something, it doesn't work, but I'm always open and always throwing things around and it's seeing what sticks, really, and reacting to the sound that they're making, and then a sort of, relationship works between the two of us. And he said, okay, I understand what you're doing now. And, because I'm not a musician, he'd say, oh, I know what chord you played there. So, what he played, sorry. And then he'd say to me, okay, here's another bunch of stuff in that area. I mean, particularly like the last track we played, Memory to Stars of Life, which is interesting. The very end of that, there's layers and layers of guitar, and there's a bit at the very end where I chopped up a bit of guitar. And somebody had said to me later, geez, you must be listening to Tinawari. And I said, who are they? I don't know who they are. And he said, but your guitar lines at the end are very Tinawari sounding. And when I went out and got Tinawari, I just thought, my God, they're the most amazing band. So, it's odd how things are, are in the ether, and they, are very, very similar to other things, even though you're not aware of them.
Wow, that sounds absolutely brilliant on a pair of headphones as well, doesn't it?
Thank you.
Wow, that's so powerful. I want to ask you as well about the in between the silence. That's where we really exist. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because obviously, there's the literature element is involved in there as well. Dermot Bulger, Roddy Doyle, Anne Enright, and so on.
Well, same thing. What had happened is I've two things had happened. I had an American friend who sent me this article, a little video clip on YouTube, and it was these different tunings of guitarists, and there was one called 440 tuning. So the guy had a bowl of water sitting on top of a speaker, and he played it in the normal tuning, and the water would fizz, and then he played it in this different tuning, and the water would lap. So the theory behind the whole thing that we're made of 90% water, and these tunings are more sympathetic to us. So I have a Dutch guitar player who comes over and plays me every few years. Like, this guy is totally different to me. He works with big jazz orchestras, and he played with Harry Connick Jr., Ray Charles, people like that. So he comes in every year and he works with me. So I bought a really high powered tuner with these different tunings on it, and we were starting to go through it. So anyway, I had these bunch of songs, about 10 or 12 of them, and they were sitting there. I didn't really know what I was going to do with them. And then I had a guy called Brian Palm. He is in the Mary Stokes band, blues band, who actually I produced an album for them a while ago. And what happened was we were sitting there having a conversation, and he was just, in the break, he just said to me, "Oh, me and my wife Mary were traveling across America, and we stopped off at this Indian reservation." And he said, "We went in and we didn't feel very welcome." And I just said, "Look, stop. Don't tell me the rest of the story." I opened up this random track. It could have been any one of the tracks. And Brian went in and told the story about, it's really powerful. Basically, these American guys go over and they fight in the Korean War, and they're used to talking code in Indian language so the enemy doesn't hear. But anyway, the basic one of the lines is they got off the bus, they arrived back in America, and they stepped off the bus and they were in their uniforms, and they heard a roar in the background. Someone said, "Hey, prairie nigger, take off that uniform," and the guy was shot in the back. So, after serving his country, it was really, really mind-blowing. So anyway, that was the story. I took it home, played it to my wife, Denise, and I ran like a film in our heads that without any visuals, and that's where the whole thing started. A friend of mine, John Duffy, who I paint with, an artist friend of mine, he passed away about 6 years ago. And he was a really close friend of mine. And I went up to see him 2 weeks before he was died. He ended up with leukemia. It was really terrible. Like, his son died 10 years previous of the same disease. And it was shockingly. So I didn't really, it was in a terrible state. I didn't really know how to deal with this. But I went up to see him, and lots of his friends said, "Look, he won't see you, Stano. He's not going to see you." But he actually sent me a text saying he wanted to see me. So I went and sat with him. It was a shocking sight when I'd seen him. He was such a vibrant man, a brilliant artist, and he turned into a shell of himself. So part of the conversation, he said to me, "Look, Stano, the biggest regret I ever had in my life was I was never in the recording studio with you." And just off the top of my head, I said, "John, look, because he used to say to me over the years, I've got these poems, must come in and do a bit of work." And I said, yeah, John, but it never happened. So immediately I said, "John, have you got anything from me?" And he said, "Yes." So we went into the studio, and I think I said before, it was the most shocking day in the studio, the most powerful day I've ever had. It's really about art and music, what it should be. He was telling me these end-of-life stories for his kids and his family, and it wasn't self-pity at all. It was just really powerful. But anyway, out of that, we put a show on in Ballymun, which is a tough part of Dublin, and we got John's images. So Denise, my wife, because she works on film, she said, we're trying to figure out how will we, put on this show. And the guy in the theatre said, "Look, this is Ballymun, Stano. Like, lots of people are going to be getting up, going to the toilet, drinks and this, that and the other." When we started to play and the stories with the music, I was commissioned by Dublin City Council through a friend called Ray Yates at the time, and he commissioned me to do the stories. You could have heard a pin drop in the place. Nobody moved. Nobody got up. And when the lights came up again, people were in tears. So that led on to me sort of thinking, okay, there's something really special here. And a curious thing happened. I just put the word out. Sometimes you think you're working in isolation on my own over the years, because I've never really part of the music scene here in Dublin. So I put the word out to Roddy Doyle and Anne Enright and people like that. And people said, "Look, you haven't got a hope in hell of these people coming on board." And every one of them said yes, which was amazing. And what had happened then, we got picked up to go to America. So the show played for 2 weeks off Broadway. And a really interesting thing happened there, which is an amazing thing. I had a track that was very experimental. Brian had told me another story about a dolphin He was swimming in the water with this dolphin, and this dolphin grabbed him and took him down underneath the water and pinned him underneath a rock and was drowning him. And he says he thought he was going to die, and the only thing he could say, he said, I spoke in my mind. I said, look, please let me go, I'm going to die. And the dolphin let him go immediately. And like, so some sort of telepathic thing was happening. So anyway, I had this track, and it was very, very experimental, and it was about the dolphin, because I was trying to make music that was underwater music without using water. It's sort of, I was just in my own head trying to figure. Anyway, we played in New York, and this guy came up to me after, and he was blown away by it. And there was only 2 African American people in the audience, and it was himself and a husband and his wife. Turns out he was the 3rd highest ranking NYPD guy in America. And he came in and said to me, what was that track? It's mind-blowing, And so that was something where I was going to edit myself, where I was thinking to myself, it's too experimental, it doesn't fit in. But out of that, he became a great friend. I recorded his aunt, who was 96 years of age, and she left the Deep South when she was 15 years of age. She was being abused by her family. And one night she woke up and threw a pot of oil over the guy that was abusing her and got out of town. So look, but the interesting thing about that, I got 3 stories from 3 generations, from a woman coming from plantations, with segregation in America, to him ending up being the 3rd highest ranking guy in the NYPD, to his son being a black gay ballet dancer in America. And it was just amazing. And then, and like out of that then was that he said to me, oh, I've got a friend called Ron Carter. And I was thinking, I know this guy, I know the name. Turns out he's Miles Davis's bass player. Like he's the most, he's the most played guy in the history of jazz. He's on 2,500 albums. So all of a sudden, I'm back in New York recording with himself. And then the guy who's recording in the studio with me is a guy called Ivan Julian, who was a guitar player in Richard Hell and the White Eyes. So, and he was the guy that sort of, that Michael McLaren took the whole punk image from the ripped T-shirt with the safety pins. So it's strange how things go around in circles and come back.
You mentioned Malcolm McLaren there. What's this about you and John Lydon back in the 1970s? Was John Lydon someone that you worked with, or you just knew as a friend, or?
Yeah, friends of mine at the time. Would you believe I was a punk when I was about 15 years of age, and I was actually hung around with a lot of guys from Kojaque who were boot boys and skinheads. And I just got into punk, and people didn't really know what punk was. I read about it in the music press, and then used to listen to John Peel. So I was walking around town for about 6 months with coloured hair and bottle creepers and drain pipes, and getting attacked most of the times in Dublin. But one day it was a knock at the door, and friends of mine, because Jack MacDonald was had family in Coolock, and he was friends with John Lydon. And one day I got a knock at the door with friends of mine. I said, come on out here, we'll come up for a drink. And I said, oh no. And he said, no, come on. So I came out and got into the van, and John Lydon was in the van. So it was amazing, So I think I didn't realise at the time, but I think he came over to Dublin a few times just to get away from the whole, all the hysteria in London and what was going on.
Right, okay, we're going to take another track. This is our second last track. This track is from a 2010 album, Trallywaggers, Can't Find My Way Home. We'll play this and then we'll have another chat. And that was Can't Find My Way Home from the Trallywaggers album. Now, Stano, you've talked about working with musicians and getting them in the studio and so on, and kind of using the studio as your instrument. That album is yourself and Q, isn't it? It's Colm Queerney. How did that collaboration come about?
Colm was playing a bit of guitar for me, and then I just got to know him, and he has a studio here in North Strand in Dublin. So he asked me would I, like to do an album together. So we came to an agreement. Basically, he loved my backing tracks. So the agreement was that I'd make the backing tracks. He'd come in and play all the guitar parts and bits and pieces, and then I put the whole thing together. But what was really interesting about that is just about how you come across some amazing people. Colm had picked up these really old vintage organs, and one of the organs was from the 60s. I think they picked her up in an orange hall in the north of Ireland. But it's interesting, there's a guy from Liverpool that comes over. He's actually a nuclear scientist, would you believe? But he's interested in the real old Hammond organs. And so what he used to do, he used to come over to Dublin every few months. So when Colm would get a new piece of equipment, particularly the organs, he'd come over for the weekend, he'd check out what it needed. He'd go off and he'd be back maybe 2 months later. And he'd hunt down all the original parts and valves. He wouldn't put any spurious parts into it. Wow. And he'd come to Dublin. But he was such an amazing man. He'd be stuck underneath like the Hammond organ for the weekend, and he wouldn't take any money. And the only thing he wanted was a packet of chocolate biscuits and some coffee. So, like, to me, like, to be in the world with people like that is stunning, And even though, say, he wouldn't be part of the music industry, he is. He's a vital part of it. So, in a way, it's gathering all these disparate people and areas and ideas, and that's really what I love. And then, with Colm particularly, he's such a wonderful guitar player, and, he was so easy to work with. So in a way, once you set the ground rules with people, it's really, really, easy to start coming up with stuff. And what was interesting about that was, I always think to myself, where did these ideas pop into my head? I mean, just one little interesting thing. When Aidan Gillen, the actor, came into the studio to do a story for me for In Between Silence, he was talking about, he used to email me every now and again, and he said, look, Stano, give me a few hints about what you want and this and the other. And I said, look, it could be anything. It could be about your mother or your father, a little random thing that happened. So I gave him a little point, and I said to him, look, I said, this is a really strange story. Me and Denise were walking up Talbot Street about 5-6 years ago. It was a blistering hot summer day, and out of the corner of my eye, I seen some flashing on the ground, and I looked over, and it was a goldfish. No water around, and it was alive, and everybody was looking at it. So I ran, grabbed the goldfish up, ran into a restaurant. There was a couple sitting at a table, and I threw the fish into a glass. So the manager came over, thought I was sort of mugged him, and he looked and I said, look, there's a goldfish. So anyway, I came back about 2 weeks later, went into the thing, and I said, how's the goldfish? He says, yeah, he's in my kitchen, he's great. So I'm thinking, it was something like out of Twin Peaks, where in the name of God? I was thinking, there was no water on the ground, where did he come from? Like I couldn't figure it. So anyway, I said it to Aidan, and Aidan said to me, well, I've got a better story than that. It's about a rabbit. And I said, oh, right, you're on. So Aidan comes to the studio, and we're sitting in, and he, just before he went in to record, he just said to me, Roddy Doyle has done a story. And I said, yeah. And he said, what's it about? And he said, oh, it's about a story about an old man. And he said to me, I've got a story about an old man. And I said, would you tell me that story? So the story that Aidan was going to tell in the studio wasn't the one. And basically, he had a story about when he was shooting The Wire in New Orleans, a few years previous. He says that him and his friend had came out of the shoot, and they were walking down the street, and it was after New Orleans, where all the devastation. And they said they'd seen this old man walking down the street with a nightgown on him attached to a drip. And everybody was ignored him. So they went over and started talking. He was an elderly black man. And he said to him, what's wrong with you? And he says, I want to go home. I'm trying to find my home. And this is the address. So they called the police, and the police didn't come. So they stopped the taxi driver. And the taxi driver says, yeah, I'll take him to the house, but you'll have to get in, and you'll have to, be with him. So basically, they drive through the city to his house, and when he got to his house, it was all lopsided. And as Aidan said in the story, it was like something out of a nightmare. So Aidan walks up the step, and on the door there was a note with the picture of the man saying, if you see this man, please contact me. So basically what happened is he found the woman, and his daughter came along. And the story was he had actually walked out of the hospital, and he was walking around the streets for 2 days with this drip trying to get home. And Aidan had to come across him. But because of all the chaos that was going on, he was being ignored, So it's that sort of, there's so many wonderful stories out there. So, even with my music now, like it, to me, In Between Silence is probably one of the most important works I've ever done, because it's part now of UCC in Cork. And another, just a quick thing, I don't want to go randomly, because a friend of mine called Kevin Pearce, who's a ceramic artist, and I used to paint in the lane, and he used to walk down the lane and he'd see me painting. And he came in one day and he said, look, I want to go back to art college. So eventually he went back to art college. Denise gave him a few references, and I had a few friends that gave him reference. But he went to college in Galway, and everything that they said you cannot do in pottery, he done, because he was an engineer.
Yeah.
He made a table and chairs out of porcelain, and he put together with these nuts and bolts, which were porcelain nuts and bolts. So I was looking at them one day and I said to myself, could that be a page in a book? And he said, yes. So anyway, we'd put this together. Everybody comes in the studio, I'd take a line out of the story and they'd carve it into the book. And now UCC have bought the book and it's in their library, and it's going to sit alongside the Great Book of Ireland, which is, so all these random things that are all connected and unconnected.
It's amazing, Stano, absolutely amazing. And you've got something else coming out, just like meeting Picasso.
Yeah, that's a strange thing as well. We were sitting in the studio and the engineer just had mentioned that line. I said, that would be a great name for the EP. But a guy called PA, or Paranoid Visions, I met him. I actually met him at a book launch, and he said to me, look, we should do something. So anyway, it was going on for a few years, and then last year I contacted him again, and we said, look, we really should do it. And he said, look, I've got the guys from Crass, I've got the Shen from the Cravats, and so they had sent the stuff over on the iPhone, and we went in the studio for 3 days, and the result of it is this, which is amazing. Like, it's another area that I've never really worked in. It was really, really quickly, because it was a break in between the COVID thing. Like, we just got in and done it very, very quickly. And then I started listening to the Shen, and I thought, God, this guy is on the same wavelength as me, and
Wow.
and I started to pick up his radio show, and so it was similar to yourself. I'm hearing all this new music, which I don't generally hear, here. I mean, the only guy that plays my stuff in Ireland is Dan Hegarty. He's supporting me. He's similar to yourself. It's just all about the music. And anytime I have an album, ready for release, he'll interview me,
Well, I'll be playing it here still, Stano, so don't worry about that. And more and more people need to be playing it as well. It's absolutely brilliant. And this, when it comes out, it's going to come out on, is it FOA, Forward Music, in association with Louder Than War? Yeah. So some great credentials there as well. And I'm looking at, it's a white and red splattered vinyl, which is fantastic as well. And is that Peter Jones, Paranoid Visions?
Yeah, Peter Jones, Paranoid Visions, yeah. I think the delay at the moment is that because of the vinyl, because of the plants, because so many people are getting stuff done. But the interesting thing, I think this is fair. I think it's nearly sold out here in Dublin on pre-orders already. So I don't know in Britain and Louder Than War, so which is great,
Stano, it's been a complete pleasure. I could speak to you for hours and listen to you for hours. Maybe we'll do this again in a future date as well. I think you got lots of stories as well. We're going to end with one last track, and this track is Marley Stripes from Unknown Distance. This is 2013, is it?
I think so. Jeez, I forgot about that track. I thought Can't Find My Way Home was the last track, but brilliant, yeah.
All right, okay. We're going to leave everyone with this one. Thanks a million, Stano.
Oh, thank you, Dermot.
They say I live in the past.
Indie Rocks Radio.